好的问题可以带出有价值的答案，让我们今天从几位重量级的主持人中学习问好问题的技巧。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the art of asking a good question. And we're going to do that by looking at some of the greatest interviewers over the past 30 years up until the new school of interview. Now, you may be wondering, why do I need to learn interview questions? But the reality is, interviewers are really good at holding conversations. So why we want to share this today with you is when you're doing a job interview, if you're just interviewing someone to create content, or you want to become a better conversationalist, there's a lot we can learn from the way that high-quality interviewers ask questions, listen to answers, and guide conversations.
不管我们是在职场中一个正式场合，或者是一个非正式场合，你可能今天在跟朋友喝酒喝咖啡，或者是在开会，问好的问题真的都可以带出来非常好的价值。你可能问到好的问题，带出来的东西是你从来没有想象到的。那我们今天呢，我们就来看看几位重量级的主持人。那这些主持人，有些大家可能非常常常听到，他可能是已经是我们上一个 generation 的重量级主持人，那有一些是比较新的主持人，但是呢，他们都有他们的特色，但是呢，他们也有一些最基础的一些问问题的一个方式。
So, before we jump into the special personality of certain famous interviewers, we have found that across most really well-respected interviews, there's a few key principles that you need to get into. The first sounds very obvious, but it's quite important, is be a good listener. A lot of times people assume an interviewer is really good at asking questions, but the reality is an interviewer is an even better listener. Because in order to guide a conversation along, you have to be able to pick up on subtle cues or words in someone's answers. If anyone is familiar with coaching, this is a very similar technique where they're very good at honing in on someone's thought process and asking follow-up. But that requires really good listening.
其实刚刚 Nick 有讲，你会觉得说我们如果要当很好的那种 interviewer， 我们问好的问题是不是这个问题要问得好，但是有的时候你要第一个要想的是要怎么样当很好的听众， be a good listener。 因为如果当你有一个 list， 你有大概10个问题你要问，你觉得你每一题都要问到的时候，你这个时候并不是在听对方的答案，而是你在想下一题要问什么。
The next major thing that you need to do is do your research. Very simply, good interviewers actually know a lot about the other person.
Yeah.
This is also true in a conversation. Now, this doesn't mean that you should stalk the person online and look up their entire livelihood. But a lot of times when you're going to have a conversation with someone, having a pretty good understanding of what they like, what they dislike, what they've talked about before is always useful in carrying the conversation.
Do your research 我觉得非常非常的重要，因为有很多时候是你的问题好的跟不好问题就是差在这个地方。当你做了 research 的时候，对方会马上能够感受到，你真的是在乎这个 interview， 你在乎我们这一场会议，所以你问的问题是直接问到一个重点。
The last important rule is very much tied to the first, which is in order to be a good listener, your interview should not be about you.
Yeah.
This is something that you will actually see a huge difference between the current generation of talk show hosts and the previous generation of talk show hosts. A lot of your late night show hosts like to play games, they like to do kind of funky activities with the celebrities, and that makes for really good YouTube clips. But you will find very often now that you learn very little about the person they're interviewing because it's not about that person. It's about whatever game, and then the talk show host is usually as or more talkative than the guest themselves.
不知道大家知不知道我们在讲谁，但是
Well, yeah, there's a few, but
但是真的，当你在问问题的时候，你不是主角 ，right？ 对方才是主角。这个我觉得在 podcast 上面好了 ，you know there's so many podcasts out there, there's so many interviews。但是有的时候你去听，你会发现这个主持人他很想要回答，他很想回答自己的问题。They like to actually answer their own questions.
yeah.
And I see this a lot in a lot of like moderator for conferences. So they just tend to kind of answer their own questions. Like the whole entire dynamic and the whole entire atmosphere would shift. 所以当你如果你的 question 并不是 focus 在对方上面的时候，这个非常快速你可以感受到大家就觉得说，那你现在在做什么？我们是你在访谈，你在问人家吗？还是说你只是在 show off？Yeah,
this was definitely one of the issues that I had with Clubhouse when that was big, where you would join rooms and they're supposed to be interviewing someone or someone's moderating a panel, and then they would just be talking about themselves the entire time.
So we're going to bring in a few really, really famous interviewers, and the first one, 我相信大家一定都知道，就是我们的 Oprah.
Now, to be fair, Oprah has been doing this for 40 years.
Probably, yeah.
I'm pretty sure she started her original show in the 1980s. So decades of experience.
Yeah.
But there's a few things that Oprah does, and it's very much tied to her on-screen personality and likely her real personality that really makes her a unique interviewer that people can pick up on. And the first thing that a lot of people talk about, and I think this is something that I've heard a lot through coaching, a lot through facilitation practice, but actually that silence is an option.
我啦 I have to say it's me, you know, when I'm doing the conversation, 我在问人家问题的时候，我很害怕那种没有声音。比如说对方在想问题的时候，我会觉得我这个问题会不会太难了，或者我要不要赶快跳进去给他多点 example 让他能够答，但是这一些真的都不必要。Silence is gold. 所以 Oprah 她常常会利用这种 silence 给对方，就算她在电视节目在录节目，但是她还是会给对方时间去思考。
This is really powerful because, as you said, for most people, when you have silence, our first instinct is to clarify.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, they just didn't get it, right? I better jump in there. But sometimes people need time to process. And if you've heard our episode quite a while ago on social styles, we actually talk about that particular communication styles require time in order to process the information. They'll actually have better answers than people who respond immediately, but that's only if you give them that moment to process and form what they want to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Oprah also do this quite really, really well is that she asks many very direct questions. 非常直接的问题，但是她的 tone 是非常温暖的。
Right. So she always finds a way to comfort, or she finds a way to ask a direct question, but without being accusatory.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of times when people ask a direct question, it usually just sounds like an attack. Like you're a witness on a stand and a lawyer is just like hammering you with questions. And it becomes a very high pressure situation. But the way Oprah does it is she'll be direct. She'll ask the question that she wants to direct, but not in a way where you're like, yeah, she's trying to just beat this person down.
Yeah, absolutely. 那还有另外一个就是她非常会 mirror back 你刚刚说的字，你刚刚所说的 phrase. Actually, we talked about this quite a lot. And this is part, I think Chris Voss talked about this,
the negotiation technique. This is quite popular where if you mirror, someone will A, feel like you're listening to them. But B, they'll also have a tendency to expand or to clarify because they feel like, okay, they understand, they get it, so I'll continue describing.
And then there's another thing that she does, and a lot of interviewers really don't do this, is she asks follow-up questions. 如果你是一个 interviewer, 你觉得你有10题，你一定要问到这10题，你可能就会错过了这种 follow-up questions because a lot of times it's, oh, there's certain key phrase, a certain things that's from the answer, and that's gold. You have to go dig in, right?
So getting into those follow-up questions is really important to just being a good conversationalist. A lot of people go into meetings and they just bullet point style, like cover A, B, C, D, or job interview. They're like, there are key points that I want to get into. But let's look at a job interview situation. Having good follow-up questions will uncover more about the person's personality than just going through your list of questions.
所以我觉得你们可以很直接就说，诶 you mentioned this. Could you tell me more about that? That's just a very easy follow-up questions.
Yeah, or what do you mean by, and then put in a word that they use like over and over again, like complicated or difficult or exciting. But just by asking a clarification, be like, oh, well, what do you mean by exciting? What about that is exciting? Then usually people will, again, start to unpack all the nuance inside a word or inside a feeling.
And, you know, she's someone that she doesn't have to have all the answers. Oprah is okay to show that she's very vulnerable, she's raw, and she doesn't have all the answers to everything. And I think there are a couple of things that she tends to do in the interviews that she leans in when she's listening. It's like a simple body language, but it's just to show that she really cares.
Yeah, we'll talk about another interviewer, actually the last one. We'll talk about Cal Fussman. But he does something very similar to Oprah, where he does mostly magazine articles and podcasts now. So you don't see him. So you don't see like with Oprah, she'll lean in. But it's just you get a sense with him and Oprah, they're just genuinely interested in the person, right? Whether it's the interviewee, but they always get the sense like they really just want to know more about it.
Right.
And so it just feels very connected.
And then she's just incredibly authentic. Yeah. As we said, she's raw. She doesn't have to have all the answers. She's really real. So let's jump into another really different host. And I think 不知道大家知不知道他，但是其实Nick 跟我都很喜欢看他的 show。那他的 show 都在 YouTube 上面 ，so it's all free. You guys can go watch it. What is the name of the show again? Actually,
Hot Ones.
Yeah, Hot Ones. Okay. 所以就是他都会请非常多不同的 celebrities， 他可能是 musician， 或者是电影的艺人啊，各式各样的艺人，他可能是在电视啊，或者是电影啊。然后呢，他们就要吃 I think it was like
10 something like
10
that.
different hot wings. 然后他们就是有10种不同的非常非常非常辣的辣椒酱 OK 然后他会问不同的问题，有10个问题，那他的问题通常会越来越困难一点点，那随着这个辣的这个程度，那这个我们的 guest 他也会觉得说他会有一些蛮有趣的一些状况就会开始发生。
Yeah, the format of the show Hot Ones is pretty unique. It's definitely there for the entertainment value, but the interviewer, Sean Evans, has been highly praised by actually expert interviewers and expert television hosts at how well he interviews people. And he's really found that perfect balance between entertainment, but actually high quality interview.
Yeah.
And it's nice to do a jump from Oprah, you know, decades of this, to him. They're on their 6th year of doing the show. You can definitely see that there are a few principles that have remained consistent from going to a nobody who is just kind of using friends or random connections to get people on his show, to now celebrities lining up to be on his show.
Yeah.
The first one is he actually has a lot of layers to his questions. So he's really good at asking a pretty basic question.
Yeah.
And then immediately layering a twist. Something that just like grabs the interviewee's attention. Like, wow, that's a really good question. That's a very different way of thinking about things. Because you also have to imagine, for all these celebrities, they've been interviewed 100, 1,000 times. So they're expecting the basic questions. But he's very good at always throwing that extra layer on it.
Yeah. 如果你们随便去 Google 一下 Sean Evans 或者是 YouTube 找一下他的 video， 你会发现有非常多 celebrity 都会说 Oh my God, that's such a good question. 他的问题真的会让你非常的惊讶，就是 How do you know about that? 或者是你怎么会可以想到这个可以有这样子的连接。 So I think what Nick was saying, and now one of the example that we pulled up, it's an interview that he did with Mila Kunis, right? It was kind of recent as well. So do you want to talk about that question that he asked?
Before I jump into that question, the second thing that makes Sean Evans such a good interview is he researches.
Oh, yeah.
So as Sherry said, when he asks question, there's really good layers, but he usually asks such a detailed question. Most of the people are like, how do you know that?
Yeah. 有些是
I don't even remember
Yeah,
that.
like 问到他们可能高中或者是国小或者是小时候发生的事情。I think I remember he said that when he does a research, he just reads everything about this person. 而且他会专门去找那种很小家的 newspaper, like a really small town newspaper, because they include the most interesting things.
Yeah. Another interviewer who's very good at this and gets a similar reaction would be Tim Ferriss.
Okay.
If you've ever listened, he has one of the largest podcasts in the world, the Tim Ferriss Show. But in interviews, and his are long form, they're like 2-3 hour long interviews. But he'll ask questions and people are like, wow, how much did you read? Okay, back to the Sean Evans example with Mila Kunis. Mila Kunis was famous from that 70s show. She actually ended up marrying Ashton Kutcher. That 70s show
Her boyfriend
star.
on screen.
Yeah, her boyfriend on screen.
Yeah.
They ended up getting married in real life, but there's an example of there's a huge height difference, right? But Sean Evans asks, is there a detail of your home you are particularly proud of to have your fingerprints on? And is there one that serves as a reminder that marriage is always about compromise? So they had just built their own house.
Yeah.
And he asks this really well-layered question, which is the first is, okay, most people will be like, oh, is there something you love about your house, right? You built it, you customized it.
Right.
But then he throws that second one in there. And that second one is there something about your house that is compromise? Well, Ashton Kutcher is like 190 something.
Okay.
And Mila Kunis is like 150 something.
162. I looked it up.
Oh, you already looked it up?
Because she's slightly taller than I am.
Yeah. But, that's a massive difference. And so that was her answer about compromise is like, okay, the house had to be built with both of their heights in mind, but then she has to carry a step ladder everywhere.
Yeah. 所以他这个问题我觉得非常聪明，就是他问的第一个问题也是很好的问题，因为他有 research 嘛，他知道他们家做了一个装修，所以这个问题呢，就是最主要是问他说，你的 design 你哪边是觉得你非常骄傲的？但是他第二个问题完全是有点转折，然后直接问跟他婚姻的关系所相关的。So yeah, I think that's like incredibly smart, and this is just a really good example. Yeah.
Right. And you can see that through most of his interviews is he always asks very layered questions where the first one is, yeah, okay, that's a normal question. But he always has that twist that makes them go, ooh, I like thinking about that.
Absolutely.
Let's jump into our next one. Back to decades-long, very highly respected interviewer, Larry King. And Larry King actually does a kind of a meta interview where he's being interviewed by Conan O'Brien on how he interviews other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this clip. 如果大家想要到我们的 handout 里面，我会把所有的连结都会放在这边。But one thing that Larry King said, and it really is the key principle of all good interview questions, is that the key is to listen, first of all, leave yourself out of it. Okay, so I have no place in an interview. And he always kept his question very short.
And because his philosophy is always the other person has the best answer.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't need to lead them. Keep your question short, and you don't need to be part of the question. Just let them answer. There's no I. And this is back to, again, he's very considered old school, traditional interview style.
Yeah.
Versus, say, Jimmy Fallon, James Corden, where it's more about the entertainment value, but then they are as much of the interview as the guest. But when you find that it is entertainment and you learn very little about the guest themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to the next one, which is Nick is going to talk more about him because I actually don't know too much about Cal Fussman, but I looked it up and I did a little bit of research and it's very interesting. And he seems like he definitely interviewed many very important figures, right?
Funny enough, Cal Fussman and Larry King are best friends.
Oh, okay.
So Larry King and Cal Fussman have breakfast every single day together at like a Jewish deli in New York. But every day, these two. Cal Fussman is a New York Times bestseller. He's also very famous for writing for Esquire. So he wrote a lot of the big interview pieces for Esquire. He interviewed Muhammad Ali, Mikhail Gorbachev, just like anyone that you would consider like a highly influential historical figure. Probably Cal Fussman wrote the article for Esquire about them. But Cal Fussman is an interesting person because he has a very specific interview philosophy, which is you aim for the heart and not for the head from the very beginning.
Yeah.
It's like your first question should never be aimed at someone's logic center. It should be at their heart. And he goes, that's how you get someone to open up immediately.
就是先打动他的心。Yeah, 而不是去问那种比较普通的问题。I think most questions, interview questions, is about the head. Okay, so for example, what is a kind of a, about the head kind of interview question? It's mostly like, oh, okay, what is your strength? Right, that kind of question. What's your weakness? That's usually a question to the head, not to the heart.
Yeah, it's a very logical thing, or people will assume, okay, I need to warm the person up. I need to make something that they can think about and just kind of get back to me.
Right.
But Cal Fussman's style is like straight to what's the first moment that you knew you wanted to be an actor? What's the greatest lesson your father or mother ever taught you? Like, he doesn't jump around and, like, warm them up. He just goes for it. But what he finds is that this not only gets them to, like, open up immediately, but also means that he will have very different answers in his interview than you will get from anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because, again, celebrities or, like, important figures, they get interviewed all the time.
Yeah.
They're ready for it. They have practiced like how to sound eloquent, how to output the answer really quickly. So when you mix it up, it changes the nature of the interview. Cal Fussman actually coached Tim Ferriss later in Tim Ferriss's career, and you actually see pieces of that. So for example, Tim Ferriss was interviewing Edward Norton. Obviously, very well-known actor. Yeah. And the first question that Tim Ferriss starts talking to him about is his love of surfing. And that was a way to get him not into the how do we structure this logical, how's your career going, but to talk about a skill that maybe a lot of people don't know Edward Norton has. And then that got him like down a different interview path. The last thing that I want to wrap up this interviews session with is we often talk to people about get to the point, be upfront. But when it comes to interviews, most interviewees, and Cal Fussman talks about this very specifically, is ask your key question at the end. If you've unlocked their heart, you aimed for the heart, not for the head. When you get to the difficult question, the controversial question, but the question that people are kind of looking for the answer for, once you hit that towards the end, they're in a place that they're ready to answer and not be defensive about it.
尤其是那种某些问题是特别受争议性 kind of controversial, right? You kind of ask that at the end. And I think this is a really good thing to apply in a negotiation environment.
Right. Like you need to have them on your side or at least ready to work with you before you get to that controversial question. Well, we know this was a lot of information, but we hope that you can gain some key lessons from these very well-known, very well-accomplished interviewers about how do you ask questions? How do you think about getting into that conversation with someone? We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.